The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to Paranormal Concept right here on Parasearch UK Radio with your host, Paul Rook.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and on tonight's show, as always, we've got the lovely Kerry Greenaway. Hello, Kerry.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Have you had a good weekend?
I had a very lazy weekend, actually, this weekend. I'm on holiday from work, and I've just gone into stop mode.
Well, yeah.
That's not good, right? That's really not good. I've got too much to do. I can't just go stop.
Yeah. I must admit, I had a weekend off and didn't do anything. I just turned my laptop off of anything paranormal and just had the whole weekend off. It was so nice. Sometimes
it's really good to do that. Sometimes you need to step out of it and just remember why you got into it in the first place and re-establish that, particularly when you see across the socials some of the things that are going on. It's sometimes good to take a breather.
Oh, it is, and it just recharges the batteries and you come back with a vengeance, and then you look at your workload and go, oh, I need a holiday.
Yeah. I'm kind of looking at my workload thinking I've got to get this done, and I'm like searching for inspiration at the moment and it's just not happening. So it's like holiday mode. Absolutely. It's just not the one.
No, that's it. I've got a few blogs to write. I've got planned. I know I've had the Green Children of War Pit planned for ages.
Mm-hmm. That was promised about 4 months ago.
Yeah, I've been busy since.
Right.
Oh dear, and then like the research for tonight's show,
mate. School holidays is all I can say. Is the school holidays? I sit down. How many times have I sat at my desk today and got into the thought pattern, and then some kid will go, "Mom," and have a requirement that needs me to leave and sort it out, which is fine. That's parenting. That's called being a mum. But then I lose my train of thought. You know what I mean? So then I have to sit down, and then I have to go through the whole mental process again of where I was at to form the sentence I needed. And then just as I've got it, it'll go, "Mom."
What you need to do is teach them a bit of independence, so that from the age of 10, they can do everything themselves and don't need you unless it's life-threatening.
Honestly, and my kids are older. I don't know how I managed when they were younger, because they are pretty independent. But no, they can't seem to go 10, 20 minutes without a "Mom." It's fine.
Anyway, that's enough about parenting, because this week we're not talking about parenting. We'll do that next week.
Yeah, that's a different channel. Sorry, a little distracted by kids at the moment.
Okay. Anyway, tonight's subject, we was going to talk about symbology, but because it's a vast subject, we decided just to pick on a couple of symbols, because we can always revisit and do different symbols anyway. Yeah. So what symbols did you look at?
Well, I think just to reiterate what you said, really, that the symbols are such a huge part of our culture, not just our culture, but every single culture across the nation, across history, that you could, to pinpoint specifics is very difficult with this particular topic. But, you know, each symbol is so fascinating. I mean, we looked at the main one we looked at 3 for this occasion, because trust me, we could probably do an hour easily on each symbol alone. But the first one was the pentagram, which is so well known nowadays. It's plastered all over products that you can buy everywhere in the pagan Wiccan kind of community. And it's the one that people seem to revere the most, and is used a lot in ritual. It's used a lot. It's very iconic, the pentagram. And it has so many different meanings depending on culture and religious perspective. So it's a fascinating one to start with.
So with the pentagram, isn't it used by different religions?
Yeah, totally. But people forget that bit. They just focus on the pagan links to it and the occult links to it that it's got and stuff like that. Yeah. Whereas actually, it kind of originates right back from Sumeria. And, this is a thing that's come up quite a lot with a lot of different topics. The ancient Sumerians and that there's a Mesopotamia area, that was a real melting pot of a lot of theories and thoughts that have come out regarding belief system roots, as it were. And again, this is another one that goes back to that sort of time. But at that time, it wasn't a religious symbol. It was just a word in their language. That's how that's been translated to. And it just kind of means an angle or a corner.
Okay.
Which is a bit more prosaic than the things we put to it this day and age. Which is kind of what I thought. I mean, I know it as a symbol, mainly from the work that I do. It's a symbol of protection. It symbolises the 5 elements, and as much as it does the directions and stuff like that. It's got so much to it from so many different mythologies that you can't help but think symbols have power. And when you work with a symbol, like the pentagram or something, there is a definite energy shift change than if you just try and do it blind without any tools at all. So it is very interesting when you do introduce symbology and, the different elements within your working and stuff like that. It is quite fascinating, an experiment to try as if you're working in that way.
Was the pentagram ever used in any sort of ancient text to mean a phrase or another word sort of thing, like a hieroglyph type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it does have that. I mean, in cosmology, going right back to the 6th century before Christ. Yeah, that one. I can, me and eras.
Well, I didn't really know there was more than one Christ.
It was used. It was used then, and it was used in the Far East as well. And the Far East was where we got the element links from, which was the wood, fire, earth, element, and water. Yeah, metal. Sorry. Though they in the Chinese mythology, those are the 5 elements that they use, linked to the 5 points of the pentagram. And actually, just on a quick side note, a pentagram has 5 points. It doesn't have 6. 6 is the Star of David. It's completely different.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people get muddled
I do
up.
that.
Mm-hmm. A lot. No,
yeah.
I see. Yeah, but people do still get that muddled up.
Yeah, I can see why people get it muddled up when they're both stars at the end of the day. But yeah.
Well, the star in itself, if you go back to the mythology of an actual star, is actually where a lot of these come from. I mean, the pentagram is actually classed as a star, same as the Star of David, the same as actually the Ankh. But we'll come on to the Ankh later. See, there are crossovers on certain things as well.
Do you reckon then the pentagram had some sort of influence in the whole birth of Jesus type thing? Because that's the star sort of that represented the birth of Jesus, because that was the one above it.
No, it was actually the 5. The star as a symbol was used as the birth of Christ. Okay, which was they say in some texts that it was translated into a pentagram. The star that the birth of Jesus.
Yeah.
In some texts, not all. I would just like to point that out.
No, it's just that the shape of the star is the star you would expect to put on top of your Christmas tree, and that represents the star that the 3 wise men followed. And do you know what I mean? And so it all sort of
Exactly, it all ties through, doesn't it? But it also represents the death of Christ as well, which is, again, the opposite side. You've got life and death. So it also represents the other side, which are the 5 wounds of Christ. Okay. So you've got a star appearing on his birth, and then you've got a star linked to the 5 wounds of Christ. So in Christianity, this symbol symbolised the life and death cycle, life, death, resurrection cycle, is actually what it represented for Christian religions. But it goes back further than that. That's the whole point. It actually predates Christianity. Nearly said Christianism.
Okay. Before they stole the star. So how far does this actually go back?
It goes back to ancient Sumeria. So this is going back, a couple of thousand years before Christ.
Okay, and what did they use it for?
As I say, they used it as a word. They used it just for a word. It was just their symbol for a word for angle or corner. That's what it's been translated to. So it was only actually further on in history that it started getting links to the elements and cosmology and stuff like that. Pythagoras actually went on to use the pentagram, and he used it as a symbol of man. So you've got if you think, actually, I think the most iconic image would probably be the Leonardo da Vinci, where you've got the man in the circle.
Yep.
Effectively, that's a pentacle. Yeah, effectively, that's a pentacle. But Pythagoras actually started that and saw the pentagram as a symbol of man.
Okay. So how did it then progress from being that word to what it is now? What was the next step after that?
Well, it kind of goes through. As I say, you can see this cross-culturally quite a lot. You can see it in ancient Judaism, which is sort of the top portion of the Tree of Life. And it actually represents the 5 books of the Torah. Okay, which crosses over into Christianity. See, it's amazing what you learn when you're looking at these kind of things. This crosses over into Christianity, which is actually referred to, and I don't know if I'm going to say this word right, but the Pentateuch in the Old Testament.
Okay.
So it kind of, the pentagram itself is so symbolic, and this has got nothing to do, we're not actually talking about what it means in regards to the alternative belief systems yet. We're talking to the mainstream religions where the pentagram actually has a huge meaning, and we haven't even talked about when it flips over into an upside down pentagram, which has got so many links to Satanism. But when you look into Satanism, it's not quite what you think in regards to, I worship a horned god and I'm evil and I'm trying to do bad deeds. Their belief system is just different to the mainstream religions. That's all. It's just a different perspective, and it's not all bad necessarily. They believe that what Lucifer did was the right thing because he actually stood up for the suffering for mankind rather than creating it. And that's why he fell from heaven. But then God twisted it and made him sound like a nasty person, and has basically mass propaganded God. This is mass propaganded against Lucifer. But that's a whole different story. That's a whole different background. Sorry, I went off on a little side angle there.
Why did the occult decide to use this symbol?
Because it does link into the elements. You've got your 5 elements. It also links into 5 planets. When you're talking occultism, planetary alignment is quite relevant at times, and that crosses over into the Wicca and pagan communities.
But there's more than 5 planets, though.
There are certain planets that have more influences.
Okay.
So
that picking on 5.
Yeah, we're just picking on some. And also, don't forget, you've got the links to 5. And because it's a 5-pointed star, you've got to remember there's a lot of things with 5. The human body, we've looked at a few already, the wounds of Christ, we've looked at, how about the 5 senses, sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. You've got those, not just to mention the elements, and that crosses into the more pagan belief systems, as well as the Chinese belief systems. So when you start looking at it throughout the history, the the 5 power points, as it were, for energy intention work focuses down onto the pentagram. And that is why it's so relevant in regards to that belief system. Because the representation that is built up over centuries and centuries and centuries, aeons, onto one symbol gives the symbol power. Well, we talk about words have power. That's why it's called spelling. Yeah, because what your words have impact. Even if you don't realise, you'd be surprised the impact of a throwaway comment can have on a person. So words have power. So in regards to that, you're putting that intention onto a symbol, and it's incredibly powerful, particularly when used in the same kind of way, a worship, a ritual and intention way to a symbol. The symbol itself will have power. But don't forget, the actual shape of the pentagram occurs naturally in nature.
Yeah.
If you cut an apple in half, where the seeds are, that forms the points of a pentagram. If you track Venus through the skies, it's known it's the pentagram. Do you know what I mean? So when you start looking at it from a whole universal perspective, forget belief system. You look at it just occurring in the natural world. It's relevant somehow. It's prevalent and relevant.
I've never actually cut an apple in half and gone, oh, look, a pentagram, but now I'm going to look. Mm-hmm. I've got to do it now. Go and buy an apple tomorrow just to cut it in half.
It's true.
Okay, I'll take your word for that. I've just never noticed it. Okay,
you have to cut it not like you normally would through the stalk bit. I think you cut it on the side.
Okay, so you cut through the core as opposed to down the core.
No, you cut across the core.
Yeah, that's what I said, but okay.
But when you start looking at it, it is absolutely phenomenal what's gone into it. And the orientation, I mean, a lot of people work with the light workers will always work with the point up.
Mm.
Yeah, they see that as really important. As a symbol of light, symbol of ascension. Yeah. Whereas the connotations with the point going down is a lot more negative.
Yeah, I can understand that, because again, with the heaven and earth, you got heaven above, hell below, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's pointing up or down. Do you know what I mean? So I can understand that positive and negative influence on what way it goes up. But then also, they just turn the star upside down to put in the goat's head because it fit.
Well, I mean, yeah, okay, maybe. Who knows? Because man is a bit like that, right? But that particular thing actually came from the 19th century. This is like early 19th century. And the difference is the pentagram represented the rulership of spirit over the physical elements. Okay? Whereas the point down pentagram represents the descent of spirit into matter.
Okay.
So it's a flipped way of working. So it's a different kind of belief system working there, but then one's heavily occult and one's more spiritual.
Okay. Yeah.
And we all know where the Golden Dawn originated from. So it was all a little bit, but then that had origins in deeper, older occult working. So it's another evolution.
Is that who attributed it to the demons and stuff like that? I
don't know, to be fair. I'm pretty sure it probably wasn't him specifically, but Aleister Crowley you're talking about, isn't it? But I wouldn't say it was specifically him. I think it was a movement in general.
Okay.
It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So but again, with all the pentagram, it's all about duality, it's all about the masculine and the feminine, it's all about light and dark, it's all about ascension or descension, it's all about victory or death, it's all about, you know what I mean, you've got dual associations with it every single step of the way, and it's about balance and bringing that forward, and everything is all about balance. So you can't have light without dark, and you can't have the sun without the moon, and you know what I mean, stuff like that. So it's all about those kind of associations and bringing those together in perfect balance, and that's effectively what the pentagram means, and that's across culture. But you know, slightly different translations are put on it, like we talked about the Christianity, and that's all about the life and death resurrection cycle kind of scenario. But when you look through different cultures, it really, really does have this duality to it, the coming together of the light and the dark forces, whatever way you want to represent that. When they flipped it, the horn god, the goat face with the horns fits it beautiful. You know what I mean? How awesome is that? But that kind of is, I believe, that particular symbol that you're looking at, which is actually a pentacle with the goat head inside the pentagram, was actually a specific sect of Satanism that used it as a marketing kind of tool, I believe, but I'd have to check my facts on that.
Yeah.
I think that was a later thing, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I've seen that down at the Witchcraft Museum in Boscastle. Because obviously, it's, as I said, it's all witchcrafty stuff. But yeah, they've got pentagrams, and they've actually got a statue of the goat person.
Baphomet is an incredibly powerful symbol in his own right. And he does represent, particularly in regards to tarot, he shows up in the devil card. And again, that's all about base instinct. It's all about that instinctual drive rather than that emotional knee-jerk reaction, that rawness coming through. And you don't always make the right decisions under those. And it can be very base, as in mating needs and stuff like that. I'm really bad at that bit. You know, sexual drives, I think, is the way we need to say that one. It's about that when you get a sexual drive, and sometimes when you're in that moment, it's very hard to control what happens because you're just in that moment being driven by a more instinctual base need.
That's why they went for goat, wasn't it? Because he's always horny.
Yeah, that's what it is.
So I just had to put that in there, little mark moment.
All right, if that's what you want to think on that one. I was feeling really clever then, and then you just come in with a silly comment. Oh, I've lost my train of thought now. Where was I going? Oh, thank God, actually, thinking about it. I was on the tarot card, wasn't I? But anyway, yeah, so that's...
Just that horny tarot cards.
Horny tarot cards. Okay, carry on then, Paul.
Anyway, no, this is your bag, because like now you're onto tarot and stuff. I mean, I don't know nothing about tarot. you do that stuff, not me. You're the expert compared to me.
So anyway, the devil is where it was going. Baphomet is depicted in that particular card. But you also do have the pentacles, the suit of pentacles in a tarot deck, which is its own deck and generally relates to, obviously, what would you think it would relate to? It's like money and business. So anyway, but that's basically a pentacle, not a pentagram. Because basically the only difference is the pentacle is an enclosed pentagram. So you've got inside a circle a pentagram, and it's just called a pentacle rather than a pentagram, which is fine because when you're working in that way, it provides that level of protection. You've got the circle of protection around your working of the pentagram. So it is a huge symbol in regards to protection and exorcism and driving away evil and stuff like that. And actually, if you in the crystal spiritual world, if you want to protect your home, there are many ways you can do it, but one way is actually burying a pentacle or a pentagram around your property at intervals, and you'll be protected. Little handy hint for you guys.
So the pentagram is basically a ward off evil spirits type of symbol.
It's one of those things where it's like one thing conveys so much. That's the only way.
Could it be used to summon as well then?
You could do whatever ritual work you wanted to in that environment, in that setting. Yeah. Whenever I do a form of ritual, that I will enclose myself in a pentacle. And if I'm trying to conjure, I'll have a separate circle specifically to project into for that, because I don't want it in the same circle as me, obviously. Hey, come on in, demon. However you want to look at it. I'm not saying it's a demon, but entity. Come in, entity. Come join me in my circle. No, thank you. You can stay over there in your circle, and I'll stay in my circle.
What I was sort of getting at was that in like the movies and media and stuff, it's always portrayed as a negative thing, and it's always to do with summoning spirits to you and opening up doorways and gateways. I suppose very much like the Ouija board, and it's portrayed in a bad light, but actually it's not like that.
No, because it depends on what ritual you're doing. As I say, if you're summoning, you wouldn't summon them into your circle. And when I say you draw it, you're not actually physically drawing it. So like on the TV and the shows and that, it's showing that it's sort of drawn on the floor with chalk, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you can do that. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying most people haven't got a room where you can draw a massive circle pentagram on the floor, pentacle on the floor. But, you can do it with energy lines too. You can draw it without using a physical tool, as it were. So that's what you do. But you also do a separate one. So if you're summoning, then that's what you do. You summon it into a separate circle that you've done the work on too, because then they're enclosed within that circle. That's how come you keep yourself safe from huge belief system thing going on here, but you know what I mean. It's like, that's the idea. You don't introduce it into your own circle, because why would you put yourself at that kind of risk? You control them, not the other way around. But if you're doing just like a general intention ritual, where you've got your altar and you're setting out and you're doing, I don't know, a Mabon or a Beltane kind of ritual, then you would use symbols of the pentagram or the pentacle within that ritual, but you wouldn't necessarily be directing intention to it. You're directing it to the universe because it's a different intention. You're putting out rather than trying to invite in. There is a difference.
Okay. Cool. So I know you was looking into other symbols as well, and we can cover this one next time. But swastika is also an interesting one.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh my goodness. See, straight away, everybody's head is World War II, Nazi.
No, I said swastika, not that. Didn't say World War II or Nazi.
No, but straight away in your head, when you see that symbol, that is exactly what your brain goes to, because it's associated with Nazism now. But the original word is actually Sanskrit. It's not a bad thing. It's a really good thing. It actually means good fortune and well-being.
Yeah, I knew that it was basically a symbol of peace before the Nazis got hold of it.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much all I knew about it until you sent me the research, and it says like it's nearly 7,000 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow.
It just shows you how a really old symbol. I mean, you can find this across archaeological sites. This isn't a new thing. This wasn't a new thing. This was something that was used and had been seen on temples and houses across India. it's actually a very sacred symbol in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism and Odinism. Not quite sure what Odinism is, to be fair, but, I think that must be going back to the Vikings.
Yeah, I would have said something like that, or maybe an offshoot of that, maybe.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
But
I can understand that. And
yeah, fascinating history behind this one. I got well in depth into this one because it is such a fascinating history of how a symbol can be used through history and become so iconic and have such a change in image as well, from being a symbol of like good fortune and well-being. So straight away, my head and goes to, why would somebody pick something that means that for their symbol for the Nazi party? Nazi party.
I think maybe we should do a whole show just on that subject. That would be quite interesting.
What, the rise of Hitler?
The swastika, from what it actually meant through the ages and how certain people ruined it. Not mentioning any names, but but because I know you wanted to talk about the Ankh.
Okay, so we'll do that then on a different show because that's fine because it is huge and actually it is. I found that fascinating. I know it's not paranormal, but hey, do you know what I mean? Symbology is just incredibly important. You threw me because I was off on a swastika dialogue there. So we're going to the Ankh. Right, again, the Ankh, fascinating symbol. And actually, this is one of the most interesting because although we kind of know it and we kind of have it translated through from the Egyptian period, they don't actually know where it came from pre that. So it's one of those symbols that they kind of are a bit confused about. But it is one of the most recognisable symbols that we see from Egypt, isn't it? The Ankh is...
not only that. I mean, the Ankh is literally the cross with the circle on the top, and it does look like a little angel. But I've also seen medieval symbols from the Knights Templar, which are very similar to that.
Yeah.
I mean, like the on the cross, like the arms are elongated a little bit more. But it's still the same shape, essentially. And that was used by the Knights Templar.
What I found really, really fascinating about this was Ankhs you would always find in gold. Right? And that's because the Ankh symbolises the sun, because it means the key of life or the cross of life.
Okay.
Right? That's what the Ankh means. That's what they've translated it from Egypt to mean. And the sun was linked to gold.
Yeah.
Whereas silver was linked to the moon. So you would only ever find the Ankh with sun colours. I thought that was quite fascinating, that little tidbit that I picked up along the way. Things you find out.
Yeah. I'd say Carl would like this subject because, to describe it, there's a picture of the Ankh next to what looks like a lighthouse.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, he would, bless him. Or a Tesla coil or something like that, he would say.
But isn't this the Ankh associated to Isis?
Yeah. Yeah, he says it's...
The Egyptian god Isis.
Yeah, he's a guy called Wallace Budge. Actually, he was an Egyptologist in the early 19th century. I don't know which century it was, but it was only 1934 he died, so,
Yeah, sadly, the 19th. Yeah, 19th.
Anyway, he called it the knot of Isis, which was actually a girdle, which again goes back to the lady garden bits, ladies' genitalia, and actually symbolises fertility, bringing back the life thing, the actual birth process. So this was a huge symbol in regards to Isis because she was just one of the main gods or goddesses or whatever she was. She was a she. So yeah, she was good. That's all I've got to say about Isis. Yeah, she was good. We like Isis.
So where does Osiris come into it?
Osiris.
Well, whatever way you want to pronounce it. Osiris.
Basically, a lot of deities are often seen with the Ankh. It was a huge symbol of rebirth, life. The cross of life. It's all to do with life. So in the death process, they're adorning their gods and their people that have died with Ankhs, because it's representing resurrection. It's representing there is life. So although this bit is dead, they're representing life. So they would assign certain gods to it. So Osiris is always seen with an Ankh, and so is the goddess Ma'at. She's often depicted with an Ankh in their hand. So this shows you how prominent this symbol was in regards to their belief system of the death process. It was a way of seeing it through. But it kind of like, with the Egyptians, I think what people have to understand is that it kind of ebbs and flows. Certain gods and goddesses, when we were looking into some of the mythology, it got very confusing, because there would be like a temple in each town, but not a temple for each individual god. So a lot of the mini gods kind of like were worshipped in the same place. Over time, it evolves into one god.
Mm.
And there becomes an evolution. And this kind of what happens with the Ankh. Sometimes it's incredibly popular, particularly during the early dynastic period. But when you come out of that, it kind of takes a secondary role. It kind of like dies down a bit. But then it then builds back up again later. So it's depending on the gods and depending on the belief systems and the ebbs and flows of that, which was actually very flux around those, the Egyptian times. The symbols, although they carry on, they sort of evolve themselves, which becomes incredibly prevalent. When we was talking about symbols, we looked at the rose, the English rose, the Lancastrian and the York rose, how that became a symbol, two symbols of families brought together. This is very much what was going on in Egypt back in the day, where you'd have lots of different gods being worshipped and they became one god. Osiris was the falcon-headed god, if you remember rightly, from the Egyptian show that we did.
Yes.
And we looked at that, and different towns or different areas would worship him in a completely different way. What is interesting is that he did pop up in all these, no matter what persona he took on, he did kind of pop up. And that is kind of what the Ankh does. It has that same symbology of the theme of life going through, but it ebbs and flows depending on what god and goddess and the belief system surrounding the death process takes on. But then it becomes linked very much with Christianity late in the day, and all it does is lose the circle bit on the top, and then it becomes the cross. When you start looking at the cross and you start looking at what we started the show about, which is the pentagram, which ultimately is a star which develops into a cross, it shows you how, I get quite passionate about this, shows you how things change and ebb and flow, and how sometimes it's very difficult to pin down origins, because for each culture the same themes will keep coming up, but they'll distill down into varying mythologies behind it. It's fascinating stuff, mate, I'll tell you.
Mm. Well, I just read again in the research you sent that the association of the Ankh with the mirror was no chance occurrence. The Egyptians believed the afterlife was a mirror image of life on Earth.
Yep. And this is where every belief system in the paranormal goes to when you talk about mirrors.
Yeah. I mean, the symbol for the Ankh is associated with everlasting life.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of when you die, you just carry on in the mirror universe, or
mm-hmm.
mirror image sort of thing.
Yeah.
But these guys are talking about when they light candles and oil lamps on the ground, it's almost like reflected in the stars.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
again, it's about that it's about that mirror image. And
yeah.
the Ankh, obviously, building mirrors in the Ankh symbology, it's incredibly rare to find a mirror like that these days. I don't think you can. I think there's very few examples of it. unless they brought it back as a modern reincarnation, I don't know. But the originals. But this is where, you know, in regards to the paranormal, we talk about mirrors being portals, you know, to something, the other realm. This is where this comes from. This is actually the origin of that belief system.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating because an Egyptian belief system has had, I mean, Egyptology throughout the Western culture has had huge interest at varying times. One of the times in particular when they were doing, you know, when they were breaking into the tombs in the early 19th century. You know, when you've got that going on and the interest in Egyptology, and then you start seeing the huge explosion in the spiritualism movement at that time, you can kind of understand the crossover.
Mm. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's really interesting, definitely. But again, you know, we've covered the Egyptians in other shows.
Yeah, well, you know, some of it, again, it's a huge topic and you can't get to cover it all. But, you know, that it's just one of those popular symbols that have come out of Egypt. But again, a small symbol means so much more than, you know, life, everlasting life. The translatable, it encompasses so much more. And that's basically what a symbol should do, is it should say a message that encompasses so much more than one word. You know, it's got to have a whole meaning behind the symbol. It's not just about the shape, you know.
And for a symbol that ancient as well to still be around today is quite impressive. Like for example, the pentagram. It's been around for centuries, and yet it still holds so much power to certain people.
It certainly does, but again, it's another symbol that kind of got a bit absorbed into the more occultism way with the Rosicrucian rose, which is basically an ankh, right? It's just a bit fancied up. But it is, again, it's being carried over into a new belief system.
Yeah.
The Egyptology influence actually on a lot of our modern day workings is a lot more than you ever would give it credit for. And it's, again, it got taken through into Christianity. You're seeing it through that. It symbolises the immortality and Jesus on the cross. And, you know, it is, again, incredibly important for a modern and effectively modern day belief system, which has come from a hell of a lot further back. So you can see this melting pot where you look at Christianity and those kind of earlier, you know, now still relevant religions. When you start looking at them, you start looking at the symbols they use and stuff like that, you can see their threads go right back. It's almost like they just kind of modernised it for people at that day and age. It's almost like nowadays it needs another new reinvention kind of thing to tell the same stories and put the same moral codes and standards out there. But it's still very highly believed in, and it's just so much further back than when they all sat down and wrote down their memories of that time. It's crazy when you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it is referenced as well in like the cult of Uman and the royalty and all that sort of, yeah. So it was very, what's the word? I don't know.
Important.
Yeah.
It's a very important thing, and as I say, the translations of both pentagram, pentacle, ankh that we've looked at tonight cannot be just said in like 2 or 3 words. It sums up so much more. But isn't this what we've said about when we was talking about Egyptian hieroglyphs before? When we looked at that, we actually said that it's like they wrote in symbols. So one symbol doesn't just mean the king. It would mean the king of all lands, above and below, and it would mean a whole paragraph, not just one thing. And that's the power of symbology. That's the power. It says so much more. It becomes so iconic in people's minds and belief systems. Sometimes they're not even aware of the power of a symbol. And, you know, we see it in today's day and age. In a modern day, we use symbols on things even to this day. You know, when you think about your place of work, there are symbols on the fire extinguishers and there are symbols on the door, and you know what they mean straight away. But the symbols like the ankh and the pentagram are so ingrained, so much more ingrained in our subconscious than people understand.
As we said with the ankh, it's a symbol for eternal life. But when the Egyptians died, they didn't believe that it wasn't almost like you'd go to heaven or hell or whatever. It was just a case of that you would leave this plane and go on to live in you'd ascend to another place and you'd live there as well.
Mm-hmm. Again, this resurrection or this ongoing, that you don't just die and go to dust, that you have longevity in a different way. Do you know what I mean? It's that life, birth, resurrection cycle. Talking of threes, quickly, let's have a quick look at the Triquetra. Talking of the power of three, because the Triquetra, which is everyone thinks is pagan, which it isn't. It goes back a lot, not pagan, sorry, Celtic, but it actually goes back further than that. Is what it does. Sorry, I know I didn't send you the information on this, but I thought it was a good time because we're talking about the fives. Well, the three is the Trinity is very, very important as well, and this is usually indicated by the Triquetra. And as I say, it's usually attributed to the Celts, like Ireland, and actually a European symbol. But it actually goes back further than that, and it's just brilliant. I love the Triquetra.
Okay,
because it links into three different things. It is, otherwise known as the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. You've got, but you've also got.
Is that the symbol on that witches program that used to be on telly?
Yeah,
that's the one.
Made it famous. Yeah. Well, it didn't make it famous. Yeah. It was famous anyway, but it became in fact, a lot of the symbols nowadays, Charmed has got a lot to answer for, quite frankly, because a lot of people started looking into witchcraft because of that program. But it's a little bit like Most Haunted for the paranormal community. We all started watching Most Haunted and thought, that looks like a good idea, let's go out and try that. So it's Charmed was a fictional version of like Wicca 101. And so sometimes when you get someone come to you, they've watched that, or particularly back in the day, some more so, they've come to you and think it was like that, and it so isn't. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't. But these symbols became very, very linked to the Wicca and pagan and witchcraft kind of side of things because of the television program.
Yeah. Okay.
But this actually goes back along further, a lot further. And as I say, the three is, so prevalent. Again, you've got past, present, and future, body, mind, and soul, land, sea, and sky. Again, it can be used as a symbol of protection, but it actually more likely with the Triquetra, from my experience, it's more about tying energies together. So it's a more binding energy. So if you was going to use a Triquetra in regards to a ritual work, you would actually use it more in regards to like a binding ceremony. An intention where you're binding an intention into something.
Yeah, I can't really say much about it because I don't know. You sort of didn't send me the research on that one.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't think. I thought we were just going to. I thought, but if we covered the swastika in more detail, then we would have run out of time. Yeah. So I didn't bother with this bit.
I think we'll do the swastika on another show because, as you said, it's like there's so much information now. We can sort of.
Particularly, the swastika in particular is an incredibly fascinating one. So I don't blame you for wanting to do a whole show on that. And it does link into a lot of, I know you've been talking about wanting to do a show on Nazi and the occultism for a while, but a good start to that is actually the symbol itself and how that got changed, its perception, its meaning and perception got changed, and how it became such a symbol of hate and revulsion. It's absolutely fascinating when you look at it from a sociological perspective. Oh, absolutely amazing. But anyway.
Yes. Should we tackle the Nazi series of shows about Christmas time, shall we?
A nice cheery one for everybody. Yeah, why not?
No, we'll do it in the new year, possibly. Yeah. But we'll also retackle other symbols as well. We'll do a series of symbols. I think that's quite good. We should do that. But we are coming up to the end of the show. Got 8 minutes to go. So what's coming up in the following week?
Right. Well, tomorrow evening we usually have Haunted Histories, don't we?
Yes.
But Penny's not with us this week. She's off with the family this week. So that's all lovely. So we talked about taking over the studio.
Has she put in a holiday form?
Yeah.
I
yeah.
it,
I'm human resources, aren't I?
I didn't approve no holiday.
Because this is why, because you upset people too much. This is why I do the human resources side of things. But we were talking yesterday, weren't we? And we were saying that maybe we should take the studio over and be really naughty. So we can either do that tomorrow evening if we wish to, or I can replay one of Penny's shows out. So it all depends on what the poll says.
Yeah, it'll be a surprise for tomorrow.
So it's a bit of a surprise. I have pre-warned Penny so she doesn't have a meltdown tomorrow night.
Oh dear.
I just like to look after my staff is all I'm saying.
Okay, so what's happening Thursday?
So Thursday we have got PSH Radio going live at 9 p.m. Carl and Sam are in the studio talking with Sandman himself from Parareality Radio. Now Sandman is lovely. I've seen him on the socials and I've heard a few of his podcasts, and he is actually really, really he's so knowledgeable, and he's such a good researcher as well. So that's going to be fascinating to listen to, because I've not actually spoken to Sandman yet, but I do know about him. And then on Friday evening, the madness and mayhem of the Dark Mirror show. Oh God, we're talking about paranormal eBay this week.
You'll probably be talking about Amazon or something at the end of that.
You never know. The amount of haunted objects that you can purchase or linked to the paranormal objects you can purchase from eBay is absolutely astonishing. And so we thought we'd actually have a look at that, this latest phenomenon. It isn't really. It's been going on for quite a few years, the haunted objects. But it's kind of evolving. It's not just paranormal equipment you can buy. So I'm going to be talking to Carl about the paranormal equipment you can buy on eBay, that sort of thing. And then we're going to go into, what can you actually get in this day and age on eBay?
In Ghost in a Bottle, and they were just selling an empty bottle. Mm-hmm. And it was 25 quid or something.
And they were
like, oh, it's a ghost in a bottle.
Yep. And they were selling them.
Yeah.
Here, have this bottle of air. It's £25, please.
It's got an elemental in it. It's an air elemental.
Try saying that when you're drunk.
Oh dear, yeah. And next week on the Paranormal Concept Show, we're going to be talking about King Arthur and Merlin.
You know what? There is a book by Graham Phillips, who's an author, who has done so much work on King Arthur, that we probably aren't even going to touch the edges of that subject. And I'm really trying to get Graham to come on for an interview to talk about his research in that, because he is fantastic.
Well, hopefully get him on for next week.
Well, I'm trying, everybody. But if I can't get him on for next week, you might get the Paranormal Concepts version, and then we'll get Graham on at a later date and get the proper version.
You'll get more like the Monty Python version, I think.
But again, our whole mythology surrounds King Arthur, particularly in the UK. I mean, he's just, it's one of our homegrown religions, isn't it? And it crosses actually quite a lot of the UK, a lot more than people actually think. Straight away your head goes to Tintagel down in Cornwall. even Glastonbury in some people's heads, you know. So when you start looking at the legend, he actually goes a lot further across the UK than you think, and he's absolutely fascinating. Again, it's a whole topic. You could spend years researching that one.
It's even linked to the Romans as well.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just astonishingly, you know, and you can tackle that from so many angles as well. But definitely. Yeah, we're going to just have a look at that one. But as I say, the real person I really would love to speak to is Graham Phillips himself. But I will work on him.
Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah. So I think that's everything from me. So I want to thank everyone that was in the chat room. Thank you for your support and the chat. And as always, thank you for Kerry for turning up. Reminding me.
You're welcome.
I knew this was your subject, see? That's what it was.
I did share the work with you, so you had no excuses.
Well, yeah, I sort of shared, yeah, you say shared the work, but you still know what you're talking about because it's what you do.
True.
You deal with symbolism a lot more than I do. So I knew you'd be ace at this, so yeah, cool. So, good night from me.
And it's good night from me.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.